Property offences. So far, we have covered the offense of theft. So just a quick recap, right? Theft is defined under Section 1 of the Theft Act 1968, where the elements are a person who dishonestly appropriate property belonging to another with the intention to permanently deprive the other of it. And each element is explained in sections 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Right? Then we covered robbery, section 8 of the Theft Act, where basically robbery is where theft is committed and force was used, or at least attempt to put the person in fear of force was was used immediately before or at the time of the commission of the theft, and it was used on any person, right? It was used on any person. That's section 8 of the Theft Act. Then we move on to section 9 of the Theft Act, where we talked about burglary, okay, where a person who enters into a building or part of a building as a trespasser, either with the intention to commit theft, infliction of GBH or criminal damage, or upon entry as a trespasser commits the offense of theft or the infliction of GBH. So today we are going to move on to the offense of fraud. But first, look at this logo, right? Is there anything wrong with this logo? Okay, some of you who are familiar with this brand or familiar with branded stuff would immediately know that if you see a t-shirt with the logo like this on it, it's not going to be a genuine good, because the real logo has the crocodile facing to your right. Okay, so be careful when you want to buy this kind of goods. I remember when I was in practice, our office was in KL. It was near Petaling Street, and one of these junior lawyers came in, and he was telling us, right, how he, the night before after work, he went to Petaling Street, and he found a really nice tie, uh, which was a Gucci tie. Obviously, it was not a real Gucci tie; it was a fake Gucci tie, but he liked it so much, and he thought that it looked really good, so he bought it. But when he got back home, upon closer inspection, he found that it was not Gucci, right, on the tie. It was actually Chugi. Okay, so we all had a good laugh about it. And he says that I can't wear this tie, right, even though he liked it so much, because he has got this fake brand printed on it. Okay, so now we are moving on to this area of fraud, where we are dealing with people who cheat another person, or we call them con artists, right? We call them con artists. Look at this comic, right? Every time I look at this comic, I'm reminded of a real life incident where previously, when I was working at the Subang campus of Taylor's College, before the university was came into being at 2010. So we were at the Taylor's College, SS15. I used to park at across the road at SS14, right? It was easier for me to get a parking and avoid jam of getting into SS15. So I had to take the overhead bridge. I don't know whether some of you are familiar with it or not. I had to take the overhead bridge which links SS14 to SS15, right? And there will be this man there. He'll be sitting on the overhead bridge, and he will have crutches with him. Okay, he'll have his crutches with him, and he'll be begging for money, right? So one day after work, I bought food from I think it was Asia Cafe or somewhere, and I was on the way back home. I walked across the bridge, and he was asking me for money. So I told him that no, I mean, as a matter of principle, I do not give money to people who beg for it. What I normally do is I give them food. So I had my chicken rice with me, and I asked him, well, do you want to have some chicken rice? And give you my chicken rice. And he actually scoffed at me. And he actually scoffed at me, right? So, okay. That's usually an indicator that these people may not be very genuine. Okay. And sure enough, one day after work, I see him walking, right, in SS15, walking along the shops there, holding his crutches on his shoulder. Right, he obviously could walk very well. Okay, and he just was putting on a show and basically asking for money to, I don't know, as my colleague was saying, maybe to for drugs or for secrets or alcohol or whatever, right? So he pretends that he is crippled, he pretends that he is disabled, so that he can actually get people to give him money. So, in this kind of situation, right, can you say that he has committed theft or not? Right? Can you say that he has committed theft? Technically, right, thanks to the case of Hinks, it is arguable that they can be charged for the offense of theft, right? Where is theft of the money? If you give him money, you can say he's theft because he basically took the money. See, the problem in the case of Hinks, as we looked at earlier, was that even if it was given as a gift, right, you can still appropriate it, right? You can still appropriate it. So you can give it to him as a gift, so to say. But the law, according to Hinks, says that he has appropriated it by taking the money and keeping it for himself. Money is property belonging to you. He was dishonest because he was faking his injury or his condition, and he clearly intended to permanently deprive you of that money. So yes, technically it can be theft, but would you consider him to be a thief or not? Right? Uh, so we got this problem about proper labeling, and at the end of the day, right, despite it being technically possible to go under theft, the label just doesn't sound right. So there has got to be a different kind of offense instead of theft. So these are the old law, right? Basically, it is deception, right? It is deception offenses. So these are found in section 15. I was about to say SS 15, right? Section 15 and 15A of the Theft Act 1968, where you obtain property by deception or you obtain money transfer by deception. Now, previously, there was also Section 16. Section 16 was subsequently repealed. It was actually taken over by Theft Act 1978. So if you look at Theft Act 1978, the short heading there, it says that the Theft Act 1978 was created to basically replace Section 16 of the Theft Act 68. So under Theft Act 1978, Section 1 is obtaining services by deception. Section 2, evasion of liability by deception. And Section 3, making off without payment. So other than Section 3 of the Theft Act 78, you see all the other offenses are basically quite similar in nature. It is all basically obtaining something, right? Property, money transfers, services, evading liability, right? And all of it is done by deception, right? All of it is done by deception. So you look at Section 15 of the Theft Act. A person who by any deception dishonestly obtains property belonging to another with intention to permanently deprive the other of it shall, on conviction on indictment, be liable to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 10 years. Let's break it up, right? So the key elements is that the person must have committed deception, right? Who by any deception dishonestly obtains property belonging to another. So the property was obtained by deception. So the victim must have been deceived, right? He must have been deceived, and the accused here must have received the property. All right. So the victim must have been deceived, and the accused must have received the property. And these are the key elements, right? When you talk about offenses of deception. So basically, obtaining money transfer by deception. Again, there was deception, and by deception, money transfer was obtained. Or Section 1 of the Theft Act 78, services was obtained when the person giving the services was deceived, right? It was obtained by deception. Section 2 is when liability was evaded by means of deception, right? But there were problems regarding these offenses. One of it was what happens if deception cannot be proved, right? What happens if deception cannot be proved? And there's a difficulty also faced, right? How do you know whether a person was deceived or not? Because a person may or may not be deceived. Let's just say, for example, the person who was pretending to be crippled or disabled, and then the victim, so to say, the victim walks past him, sees him, and pities him and gives him some money, right? Now, according to the provision of Section 15, he must have been deceived, right? He must have been deceived, and therefore because he was deceived, he gave the money, right? So these are the elements that needs to be proved, and it can be quite tricky because the person may not have been deceived. To him, you ask him, "Do you think he was disabled?" No, it just doesn't matter to me. I just wanted to give him some money, right? And what was the purpose of you giving him the money? Is it because you gave him the money because you were deceived, or you just genuinely felt bad for him, right? That he was disabled, or maybe he was just sitting there. The fact that he was sitting there begging, and you feel bad for him, right? So these are the difficulties faced when we talk about these offenses by deception, and therefore the new law was created. Right, new law was created to also try to simplify it, because you see, under the old law, it is there are a lot of overlapping, and there's a question about whether do we really need to particularize so many different kind of offenses when generally at the end of the day, it's a person who receives something through deception. So the new law was created by Parliament, the Fraud Act 2006, and the key offences we're going to look at is Section 1, the offence of fraud itself, and Section 11, the offence of obtaining services dishonestly. Now, Section 3 of the Theft Act 78 survives, right? So Section 3 of the Theft Act survives. There is still the offence of making off without payment. And you see that it is different from the other parts of the old law because there is no requirement for there to be deception. But we'll look at that later. We're going to go through the new law, starting first with Section 1 of the Fraud Act, which is the offence of fraud. So Section 1 of the Fraud Act provides that there are three kinds of fraud, right? So again, the magic number 3 appears. And the three forms of fraud are found in Sections 2, Sections 3, and Section 4, where Section 2 is fraud by false representation, Section 3 is fraud by failing to disclose information, and Section 4 is basically fraud by abuse of position. Let's look at Section 2, right, which will be the one that we're going to spend the most time on. So Section 2 is fraud by false representation. Section 2, subsection 1, a person is in breach of this section if he A. dishonestly makes a false representation, and B. intends by making the representation to make a gain for himself or another, or to cause loss to another, or to expose another to a risk of loss. So that's basically the offense, right? You make a false representation, and you do so with the intention to make a gain or cause a loss, right, to another. Okay. Now, subsection 2 explains when a representation is false, right? It explains 2.1a. Basically, representation is false if it is untrue or misleading, or if the person making it knows that it is or might be untrue or misleading. So looking at this offense here, right, this definition of fraud by false representation, what are the elements of actus reus? Okay, what are the elements of actus reus? You may pause the video now and look at it and try to figure it out, because in the next second or two, I'll be telling you the answer, right? What is the actus reus for this offense? The actus reus of this offense is basically just making a false representation, right? Just making a false representation. That's the actus reus for this offense. Take a look closely, right? 2.1a and b. The other parts, the other elements are not actus reus, are not external elements. Those are all elements of mens rea. So the only element for actus reus is to make a false representation. And subsection 2 explains when the representation is false, right? So the actus reus is to make a representation which is false. Right? Section 2, subsection 3, as we have seen earlier on, and also subsection 4 goes on to explain what representation means, right? Representation can be representation as to fact or representation as to law, okay? And it also includes representation as to the state of mind of the person making the representation or the state of mind of any other person. So you can say that basically, in my mind, right, is this, or the other person feels that it is that. Okay, so that's basically representation. Any representation as to fact, or even a representation as to the what the law is. So, for example, right, you go to a used car salesman, he will represent to you that this car, right, it's like new, or this car has only got one previous owner, right? If that is untrue, if that is false, or that is misleading, then he has made a false representation. Now, representation may be expressed or may be implied. So you can expressly say it out, or just like the example of the crippled person, he may walk around with crutches, and you are implying that basically you are handicapped or you're suffering from some injury. Okay, that's the implied representation. Uh, Now, this is a really old movie, Leonardo DiCaprio with Tom Hanks. Catch Me If You Can. It's basically based on this person who was a con artist, who was a con man, and he was a very confident con man, right? Even in his teenage years, from 18 years old onwards. And one of the things that he uh, famously did was that he passed off himself as a pilot. So he didn't have to say anything. He just dressed up as a pilot and he just walked in and pretended to and acted like he was a pilot. So it was a implied representation that he was a pilot without even saying that I am a pilot, right? So it can be expressed or implied. So when you make a payment by check, you are also making a representation that you have making a representation that is implying that you have money in your bank account, right? You have money in your bank account. So it can be implied representation that you have money in your account. So you see, actors' reals at the end of the day is just to make a representation which is false. Now, for the first time in learning criminal law, for you, we finally see that this is finally see a conduct crime, right? So fraud, the offense of fraud is not a result crime. Okay, it's not a result crime. Sorry, I keep disappearing from the video. Like lighting is not very good. Okay, it is not the result crime. All other offenses are the result crime, right? For murder, there must have been the killing. Okay, somebody must be killed. So you need to talk about the result. Offenses against the person, right? There must be a result. Either the person was afraid, suffered apprehension, or actually was inflicted with force, or suffered some sort of injury. Okay, so the offenses, we look at sexual offenses, there must have been a result also, some sort of result, although arguably you want to talk about child grooming. Child grooming may be a conduct crime. Okay, uh, but most of the other sexual offenses are usually result crimes. Okay, um, for property offenses, you see that they are all result crime. All result crime. Theft, then you must show that there was appropriation of property. Robbery, you must show theft, so therefore it's a result crime also. Burglary, right? Burglary, well, arguably 91A may not be a result crime because you just enter into a building or part of a building as a trespasser with the intention. Although arguably the result is him and no, not a result, right? Yeah. Okay. Is a conduct the conduct of him entering into the building or part of the building as a trespasser. So therefore, you do not need to show for fraud by false representation. You do not need to show any results. You do not need to show that he actually obtained money or obtained any kind of property as a result of the fraud. You do not need to show that it's a conduct crime. All you need to show is that he made a false representation and he did so with the necessary mens rea, right? So, to subsection 2, we've seen earlier, right? When is a representation considered to be false, right? It is false if it is untrue. Okay, that's clear. All right. It can be false if it is misleading also, right? If it is misleading. So, for example, this particular institution claims that they are the nation's number one law school. Is it true? Right? Is it misleading? Do you think it can amount to a false representation or not? Because arguably they could say that well, we say it's number one, but we didn't say number one in what, right? So it may not be untrue, but could it have been misleading? So that's the tricky part there, right? Could it have been misleading? And the key thing also is that the person who's making it knows that it is untrue or misleading, but not only that, right? Or he knows that it might be untrue or misleading. So if you know that it might be untrue or you know that it might be misleading, then you are considered to have made a false representation. Okay. I always like this catchphrase for Carlsberg. I think it's quite good, quite creative. Carlsberg's catchphrase, in case you don't know, is Carlsberg is probably the best beer in the world. They're not saying that they are the best beer in the world, but they're saying that we are probably the best beer in the world. Okay, and I remember as a student, undergraduate student in the UK, when I was studying there, one of the T-shirts, which now I regretted not buying, our institution name is there, the university name is there, and below it says that probably the best university in the world, right? Um, Not untrue. Okay, we're not saying that we're the best. We're saying that probably we're the best. Now, according to the Home Office explanatory notes, misleading means something which is less than wholly true, so it's not fully true, and okay, and this is a key part here, right? It is capable of an interpretation to the detriment of the victim, right? To the detriment of the victim. So that's what misleading means. So the problem then is that what if you don't tell the truth but is half truth? Okay, it can be misleading then. Half truth can be misleading. So even the act of pulling out your podcast and just this itself can it be considered to be misleading because you may be trying to make a representation that you do not have any money at all. Okay, so that's the actor's risk. You make a false representation. Now, looking at section 2(1)(a) and B, what are the elements of mens rea? Right, what are the elements of mens rea? And also subsection 2. So 2(1) and 2(2). How many elements of mens rea can you see here? Take a pause. If you can pause this video for a while and think about it because I'm going to tell you the answer already. Okay, how many elements of mens rea did you find? Right, there are three elements of mens rea. One is that the false representation was made dishonestly, and secondly, there must be an intention to make a gain for himself or to cause a loss to another, and third, is knowledge. You know that the representation is untrue or misleading, or you know that it might be untrue or misleading. Okay, so when it comes to the mens rea, three elements: dishonesty, intention to make a gain or loss, or knowledge, and knowledge that representation is or might be untrue or misleading. Now, when we come to dishonesty, we go back to the Theft Act 1968, right? The exceptions found in the Theft Act 1968, and if the exceptions do not apply, right, then we look at IV and Genting Casino, okay, where basically it's a objective test. Is it considered to be dishonest by standards of ordinary people or not? So that's dishonesty. Secondly, is the intention to make a gain or loss. Now, Section 5 of the Fraud Act defines what is gain and loss, and it talks about only gain or loss in money or other property, right? So we're not talking about gain or loss in reputation or things like that, right? It must be money or property, and also includes temporal loss also. Doesn't have to be a permanent loss. And finally, knowledge that the representation is untrue or misleading or might be untrue or misleading. Now you compare that with section 15.1 or the old section 15.1, obtaining property by deception, right? What are the key differences? The key difference is that under the old law, you have to show that deception actually occurred. You have to show that somebody was deceived because the property was obtained, right, by deception. Was obtained by deception. It also removed under the old law. Also, you see that there is a need to show causation. It is a result crime. Okay, so you have to show that property was obtained. Right, property was obtained. But under the new law, under the Fraud Act, you do not need to show you do not need to show that deception occurred, and you do not need to show causation because it is not a result crime. So if you remember when we talked about causation last semester, causation is basically only relevant when we talk about result crimes. So for conduct crimes, you do not need to show causation. So therefore, if ATM is manipulated, right, uh, there is no need to show that the ATM was actually deceived or machine was actually deceived as long as the person makes a false representation. Now, the criticism of the new law is that it is too broad and it is too general. And some have even said that it is actually criminalizing lying, a crime of lying, right? And you think about it, it is actually criminalizing lying. So if for example, right, I say to you, I say to all of you now, today is my birthday. Right? Today is my birthday. Okay. Now I know that that is clearly untrue. All right. So I made a false representation. Right. I made a false representation because my birthday is not the 20th of May. So therefore, it is an untrue statement. I made a false representation, and I did so with the intention of you giving me a present or buying me something. Okay? So if that is my intention, then I would have committed fraud by false representation. So all I have to do is just say that today is my birthday. And if I say that, that's a lie. And if I say that with the intention to make a gain for myself, then that is fraud. Okay? So it is criminalizing the offense of lying. Okay, right. So here is the pin for the Kahoot quiz. The quiz will be available as usual only up to 11 p.m. on Friday evening, Malaysian time. So please participate in the quiz. Please put down your name properly. Make it so that I'm able to identify who you are. Right. So make sure the name follows your registered name. Okay, your registered name. Thank you very much.